Welcome to The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation, all in one place. I mean, what a day this is to be speaking to transfer expert, talkSPORT's very own Ben Jacobs. I mean, Ben, let's just get straight into it. I know you're probably excited. The breaking news, Marc Guehi on the verge of completing a move to Manchester City. Can you shed us the insight to this deal, the fee, why Guehi's chosen this? What are you making of this, Ben?
Yeah, just a crazy day of the transfer market where Oliver Glasner basically confirmed he was going and so was Marc Guehi. But prior to that on talkSPORT, we broke the news that there's an agreement in principle between Crystal Palace and Manchester City. So a couple of days ago, City realised that Marc Guehi's perspective had changed. And right at the beginning of the window, the feeling was that he'd wait until summer, he'd take his pick of clubs. There was Liverpool, Arsenal, Bayern, Inter, Atletico Madrid, Real, and even Barcelona made some calls as well. But then City had the injuries to Josko Gvardiol, Ruben Diaz is out, John Stones has been sidelined as well. So they decided that they were going to move right away. And then it was all about, could Man City persuade Marc Guehi to move mid-season? And what would it take in terms of both football and financial terms? And in the last 24 hours, City have agreed a deal with Marc Guehi, verbally on personal terms. The expectation is he's about a top 10 earner at the club in the region of £200,000 a week. And in addition to that, there's a significant sign-on fee. And that's because if Marc Guehi waited, he could get a lot of money by joining a club as a free agent in the summer. It's a 5.5-year contract. After that was all in place verbally, Man City went to Crystal Palace and then this morning got to an agreement in principle. The fixed fee is in the region, I'm told, of £20 million, but there's add-ons on top, taking the total package approaching £30 million. Palace would have liked 35 million. There's not a great deal of difference between those two numbers if the add-ons are paid. And Palace also retain a sell-on clause, which means if Guehi is to move on further down the line, they can also make money potentially, although remember sell-on clauses are on profit rather than the full fee. So Marc Guehi now will not play for Crystal Palace against Sunderland at the weekend. The medical is being scheduled, and if all goes according to plan, Marc Guehi will be a new Manchester City player.
I mean, Ben, that was summed up perfectly. I mean, there's so much to unpick from this. Firstly, you said it's imminent. The medical is being booked or has been booked. Guehi won't play against Sunderland for Crystal Palace tomorrow. Could Guehi be in the squad for Manchester City for that huge Manchester derby, or has it come too soon?
Well, we'll have to wait and see on that. Obviously, now it's just about formalities. So in theory, things can be rushed through for deals, but we're already recording this, I believe, after the cutoff. So unless he's already done stuff unbeknown to me in terms of the advancement of those formalities, it's very unlikely that he'll be in the squad for the Manchester derby. And, you know, either way, Pep Guardiola's not inclined to throw in a new signing from day one in that kind of environment. So all signs point to the fact the Manchester derby will come too soon, because they only got the agreement in principle this morning, and there are cut-offs, of course, based on Premier League rules. And as a consequence, I think Marc Guehi will have to wait a little bit longer to make his Manchester City debut. It's just also worth mentioning, we might touch upon this, I know, in the next 20 minutes or so, Liverpool and Arsenal, they were both two of the Premier League clubs interested in doing a deal, but only for the summer. So this isn't a case of Liverpool not moving. Long before Manchester City decided they were going to force the issue, Liverpool had ruled out Marc Guehi in January. They didn't see any financial sense in doing the deal mid-season and paying a large fee comparative to what's left on Guehi's contract. Man City will have another argument that they had urgency, they wanted to jump ahead of the market, and they'll see it as value because they've got the player that they wanted. But in financial terms, Liverpool feel it would have been an overstretch and unwise, and also set a bad precedent in the market to be spending the kind of money that Manchester City have committed to, given the fact that if nobody had come in for Guehi, he would have been a free agent during the summer. And that might frustrate Liverpool fans because, of course, they need a centre-back and they plan to add another centre-back in 2026. But remember, the Liverpool strategy is not about getting sucked into financial bidding wars or allowing other clubs to be the domino that forces them into action. Liverpool are really strategic. So their approach was to go to the player after the summer move fell through and to say to Marc Guehi, if you want to join us, we'll be back in the summer. If you want to wait, we'll put together a competitive package, but we're not going to go to Crystal Palace and offer them in and around the same amount of money that ultimately Liverpool had agreed last summer. And that's why Liverpool didn't move. So Man City had a clear run, but the reason why they've still had to pay a relatively big fee for a player that's only got 6 months left on his contract is down to the fact that if Palace were to sanction this, which they now have, it had to be on their terms, even though they haven't quite got the 35 million, which was their starting position, because they've now got to go out in the market and spend some of the money on a replacement of their own. And of course, much like Man City, Palace might have to pay a bit above the odds because ultimately January tends to be a seller's market.
I mean, Ben, you sort of touched on it at the beginning. It's a bit of a double whammy for Crystal Palace fans, the club. Oliver Glasner has also mentioned, and as you said, that he will be leaving the club at the end of the season. We'll talk more about potential replacements for Palace, but how big of a story is this?
Well, it's one of the biggest of the window. In fact, Man City have been part of two of the biggest stories of the window, Antoine Semenyo and Marc Guehi. And we saw Pep Guardiola back last January as well. So they're going a little bit against the grain and they're being very aggressive in January markets mid-season. Some of that's down to urgency. And in the case of Antoine Semenyo, there was a release clause there. City didn't trigger it, but they basically paid slightly above the fixed fee, which was 60 million, went up to 62.5 million and got more preferable payment terms. So this is a real statement of intent to try and back Pep Guardiola. Still a question mark as to whether he's going to go this summer or stay until 2027. But from what I'm told, Hugo Viana and Pep Guardiola held a meeting towards the back end of last year. And Guardiola actually perversely expressed a kind of excitement that what's motivating him is in fixing Man City. You would think most managers just are at their happiest and most motivated when they're winning trophy after trophy after trophy. But Guardiola, regardless of whether he goes at the end of this season or in a year and a half's time, is really motivated to kind of undo the wrongs of last campaign, which extended into the Club World Cup, where Manchester City's defensive woes were exposed and they ended up getting knocked out in a shock defeat to Al Hilal. Beginning of this season, City shored things up. And until we got to about 12 or 15 games, they had the second best defence in the Premier League behind only Arsenal. But now, even in games that City have gone on to win, you think about that crazy victory over Fulham or the win over Leeds United, they're starting to ship goals. And this is why I think City are absolutely adamant that they need another defender. And as soon, obviously, as Josko Gvardiol got added to the players on the sideline, it was always likely that Manchester City might move. And then we just had to wait and see whether Guehi was prepared to go mid-season, have less options, maybe a bit of instability comparative to playing and captaining Palace all the way through until the World Cup. But City's pitch was strong. He knows because of the injuries, he's going to get plenty of starts and game time from day one. And all of that adds up to a move suiting all parties, including Crystal Palace, who of course would have preferred to take a fee with Liverpool over the summer and now have brought in money, whereas had they just waited, it might have been the right kind of move and proposition for Guehi in the summer, but from Palace's point of view, they'd be losing their captain in that scenario for free.
Yeah, Ben, I mean, with my Arsenal hat on, I hate to admit, but it is a great bit of business for Manchester City. Well, let's speak about Oliver Glasner then. We've obviously had a few managerial departures in this window as well, which you've been all over. Amorim, Maresca just before the start of the month. Tottenham are rumoured to be sort of looking at Thomas Frank's position. With Glasner leaving at the end of the season, can you see him remaining in the Premier League, or is there not much news around that yet?
No, Oliver Glasner is going to be in demand. I think he informed Steve Parish in October that he had no plans to sign a new Crystal Palace deal, and a manager of that calibre will inevitably have Premier League suitors. He was considered by Manchester United before they approached Ruben Amorim, as were the likes of Kieran McKenna, Maurizio Pochettino, Roberto De Zerbi even, and others that made that kind of final shortlist. And now we're waiting to see what Manchester United do in particular. When Amorim was there, Glasner stylistically perhaps seemed like quite a good fit, but Michael Carrick could switch to a back four. And I'm hearing names for Manchester United still like Roberto De Zerbi and Thomas Tuchel, but Glasner might come under consideration. So let's see what he does next. There'll be lots of European and Premier League clubs keeping an eye on his situation. But for now, it's quiet and we're not aware that he's got a job lined up. It feels like the decision by Glasner to leave Crystal Palace, speaking to sources, was more about Glasner and Palace than Glasner and turning his head towards another club. And that will likely be the same, by the way, with Marco Silva at Fulham as well, who has a new contract proposal on the table, but is yet to sign it. And Silva might wait and see what Fulham do in the final 2 weeks of the window before determining whether he's going to inform the club if he's staying or going. But Glasner basically revealed today that he informed the club formally in October that he wouldn't sign a new deal, and they agreed to keep it quiet for a few months. Today, coupled with the Guehi news, Glasner's chosen to point out that he's not extending. I think those two things are linked, not in the sense that Glasner decided to leave because of Guehi, but the timing of Glasner revealing he's leaving, coupled with the news of a major departure. Glasner, I feel, felt that it would be better, with the window still open, to lay his cards on the table. And now Crystal Palace are looking at options to try and bring in new managers. And the advantage is that planning post-Glasner is well underway, because Steve Parish, the chairman of the football club, has known since October that his manager wouldn't be staying. And there's a few names that we can mention at the moment. There may be more over the coming weeks. One is the Real Vallecano manager, Inigo Perez, and the other is Pepe Bordalas, who is currently at Getafe. So Palace might do their recruitment in Spain to find a succession plan for Glasner. Interestingly, I can reveal as well that Liam Rosenior was the third name on the list. He was then at Strasbourg, who beat Crystal Palace in the UEFA Conference League. Now, subsequently, he's got the Chelsea job, so the door is shut. And I think even if he hadn't joined Chelsea, Strasbourg and Bluco would have fought quite hard to try and keep Rosenior. But there's names there already. So this Glasner news might have taken us by surprise in the manner today in which it came out in the media, but Crystal Palace have known about his departure for quite some time.
We've spoken a little bit about the negativity surrounding Palace today. Have you got any positive news for Crystal Palace fans, Ben? Can they expect a replacement centre-back to come in this window for Marc Guehi?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like about Crystal Palace. That's the first thing to say. Naturally, they've been able to already do a deal for Brennan Johnson, and I expect another forward or attacker to come in through the door. Siddiqui Sheriff is the one that they're chasing on that front, who's a talented 19-year-old who can play forward or winger and is at Angers. The French side are looking for a fee in the region of 25 million euros, and Crystal Palace have placed a formal bid for 20 million euros. They're not that far apart. I am told there's interest in the player also from Germany and Italy, so it might be worth keeping an eye on Frankfurt, even though sources feel they're Crystal Palace are the front runners. And Milan made an inquiry as well, but they're not the only clubs. But Crystal Palace are definitely pushing to try and get that one over the line. And it's very likely that another centre-back comes through the door as well. No real leading names at the moment. What I can tell you is that Palace have been offered the opportunity, along with Roma and Lyon, to sign Axel Disasi, who can leave Chelsea this window. We don't yet know whether Palace see any logic in moving. Trevor Chalobah's always been a really interesting one as well, because he was on loan at Crystal Palace and there was a recall clause, and during that loan Palace didn't really want him to return, but now Chalobah's playing pretty regularly for Chelsea and seems quite settled. So there are a few options in the market, and the whole point of getting this fee, even though all in it wasn't quite 35 million, is to allow Palace some funding to move into the market. And I think the reason why a deal has actually, in the end, between the clubs been agreed quite quickly once Manchester City got the buy-in from Marc Guehi is because Palace don't want to mess around. They want to leave themselves plenty of time left in this window, and 2 weeks in the January window or so is still quite a lot of time as far as negotiations are concerned. And as a result, Palace will feel quite calm about the situation, hugely disappointed to lose their captain, but financially too good a deal to turn down. And now they do still have a couple of weeks to bring in a defender. And as I say, I think the intent, even though Brennan Johnson has arrived, is to find another forward as well.
You mentioned Chelsea there, Ben. I'm glad you did, because I know you've reported that they are interested in a new defender, centre half. I mean, Marc Guehi obviously famously came up out of the Chelsea academy at Cobham. Were they ever interested in Guehi? Was Guehi ever interested in returning to Chelsea? And why weren't they in for him?
Yeah, there was like a brief period over the summer where Chelsea gave due consideration to Marc Guehi, but we never got any indication that they wanted to move. Naturally, Marc Guehi is looking for a project where, one, he's going to earn a significant Premier League wage that is not necessarily something Chelsea's model just offers in the same way that Man City might. Chelsea have an incentive-driven structure, so players can still earn very high wages, but I think the base wage at Man City, naturally, because of their model compared to Chelsea, is always higher. And maybe the second thing, this was certainly something I heard in the summer, because we can't really talk about Chelsea being active in the days that have led up to this Man City deal. But if we flash back to the last summer window, right at the beginning in the build-up to the Club World Cup, when Chelsea were looking at left-sided centre-backs and Jorel Hatto ended up joining from Ajax, before that point, when Guehi was discussed, one of the parts of reticence for Marc Guehi is if he walked into Chelsea, his direct competition on the left side of the centre-back position is Levi Colwill. And even though it turned out Levi Colwill picked up an ACL injury, Colwill is seen as a starting left-sided centre-back. And on the right, you've got Wesley Fofana and several other names. So given Guehi was only ever going to leave Crystal Palace to go somewhere and have guaranteed regular game time, Chelsea would have been in a position where they would have had to stipulate and make that promise. And there's already plenty of competition, other players at the football club too. If you think about Man City, they've got an injury crisis, and Guehi will still feel when that dissipates, he's going to get regular game time. If you look at Arsenal, similar challenge to Chelsea. They've got Gabriel and William Saliba and the highly rated Christian Mosquera. But if you look at Liverpool for the summer, which is why they were prepared to do the deal, but only in the summer, Ibrahima Konate's got an uncertain future. So if he doesn't sign a new deal, one spot frees up. Virgil van Dijk, because of his age and the fact his contract expires in 2027, also would have afforded Guehi to have some game time at Anfield. So people will look at this now through the prism of Man City being aggressive and the money on offer. And there may be an element of truth to that, but I think the primary consideration for Guehi, dating all the way back to last summer and now, is how often is he going to play at one of these big six clubs? And that eventually was what Manchester City were able to convince him of, that joining now isn't just short-termist, and even after the injured players come back, he's going to get a lot of minutes. And that, coupled with the finances on offer, ultimately led to him picking Man City, and Chelsea never entered the race for this January.
I mean, Ben, Thiago Silva joined Porto this January window. Of course, he was a very, very well-loved player at Stamford Bridge. Who are Chelsea targeting? Are they targeting another young centre-back? Was Thiago Silva considered too old to the hierarchy? What names can you give us?
Yeah, they never really made a meaningful approach for Thiago Silva. Everyone knows Thiago Silva was open to a return to London, but he simply didn't have an option. And we've heard rumours from Spain about Antonio Rudiger. And again, I'm not led to believe that Chelsea are going down that route at this stage. People in the Chelsea hierarchy don't necessarily yet have a leading name or an urgent one, but there's an appetite to do a deal now if the right target presents itself. And that will essentially be a summer name that they move forwards into the January window. And the reason why there's not a singular name for Chelsea at the moment is because Liam Rosenior, without veto or autonomy, has to input. if he's backing Yoral Hatto and then Levi Colwell comes back, the left-sided centre-back has cover. And as a consequence, they might look for somebody that's right-sided centre-back or can play in both positions. But if Reece James is going to continue to be hybrid and get time in midfield, they may pivot and say we need a right-sided centre-back that can also play right back. And then the added complication is, regardless of the profiles available, they have to think in particular about one player, Josh Achimpong, because if they stifle his pathway, then they leave themselves in a very difficult position. And they don't want to either, because everyone at Chelsea thinks Achimpong is going to be one of the next big things, and they want to give him game time, and they know that Liam Rosenior is on board with that. So it's not just about who they can find in the market, it's about ensuring, because Josh Achimpong as of now is just not for sale, that his own development is not in any way impacted by somebody that comes through the door. So it's quite a complicated one for Chelsea. And there is some interest in Josh Achimpong from both Premier League clubs and also Bayern Munich. Jeremy Jacquet is one of the young options that I've heard. Jacobo Ramon is another. They have held some internal discussions about Marcus Senese, who's going to be available at excellent value in the summer, but he's already 28 years of age. So let's see what direction they go in there. But I think at the moment it's a long list of targets, but don't be surprised if a market opportunity presents itself if Chelsea do something in defence between now and when the winter window shuts.
I have to ask you, Manchester United, Michael Carrick was speaking to the media today ahead of the Manchester derby tomorrow. Are they going to support Carrick in terms of signings this window, or they've only got Premier League football to focus on? Are they happy with the squad?
It's not really a case of supporting Carrick per se, although it is really interesting that even though he is a caretaker, he doesn't carry caretaker or interim title. So he's got the job as head coach until the end of the season, but Man United will naturally be looking for the summer when the expectation still, regardless of what Carrick does, is another manager will come in. And as a result, January plans are more about bringing something forwards from the summer or last minute opportunism that gives Manchester United some depth between now and the end of the season. And Manchester United insiders are adamant that they might do nothing in January, and then in the summer they might go really big on two starting midfielders, of which one could be Elliot Anderson. Manchester City and very possibly Chelsea might be in that race. But I think if any twist is to happen in the final days of the winter market, a late move for a midfielder, maybe a more economical one, could be possible. And I know Manchester United haven't just shut up shop and said, let's let the window run its course. They are holding internal conversations. They are taking calls with agents. They are speaking to some player camps. It's just whether the right target becomes available. So it would be a little bit of a surprise, because we're certainly led to believe Man United will be relatively quiet and then go big in the summer on a midfield revamp, possibly bring in a fullback as well, and maybe even look at another number 9, depending on how Benjamin Sesko is doing and if Joshua Zirkzee ends up leaving the football club.
Well, Ben, I've got no more questions for you. Is there any news broken whilst we've been on here? I've heard your phone.
I don't know. I've been speaking to you. Probably 5, 6, 7, 10 transfers have all been breaking. I would keep an eye on Crystal Palace, though, because, as I say, my expectation is that they'll be looking to spend this Marc Guehi money and do so relatively promptly too. So they're going to be busy between now and the end of the window. Maybe West Ham and goalkeepers as well, because they brought in Mads Hermansen. It hasn't really worked. They tried for Philip Jorgensen, but Chelsea only want to sell permanently. And actually, in an ideal world, they'd rather not have any change of their goalkeepers at this stage. And Stefan Ortega as well, another player that was offered to West Ham United. So keep an eye to see whether, having already had a busy window, they do anything in the market as far as adding another goalkeeper.
You've been watching The Window on talkSPORT, brought to you by Intuit Quickbooks. Save time and unlock growth with integrated business tools and AI automation all in one place.